Welcome to our webinar today, everybody. I'm Heather Rodemaker-Taylor with First Nations Owista, and I'm excited to welcome you to our discussion on winning grant proposals with Debbie Goensmith and Crystal Langholz joining us to present. Our hope with this is that participants are going to leave the webinar with more information about proposal writing strategies that are going to help you access additional capital. And we thought this topic would be helpful to anyone dealing with proposals and grant writing, which is probably all of you or a good majority of you. So this webinar is the 14th webinar in our monthly series as part of the Native CDFI Capital Access Initiative some of you are participating in, which is funded by the Northwest Area Foundation. And I say this for all these webinars, but it's great about the series is that all these topics focus on different ways to grow your capacity to access capital, which is, again, a challenge that we all kind of face as nonprofits. And so to get us prepared, we're going to do our usual, which is I'm going to let Stephanie highlight some of the GoToWebinar features just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to her.
Great. If everyone could locate on the webinar platform the chat box and or some of you may have the question and answer feature. If you could locate that and answer the question, what organization are you representing today? I know for those of you that join us regularly, it gets a bit repetitive, but if everyone could answer, that would be great. Look forward to seeing those come in. Oh, great. I see Spirit of the Sun, Mille-Lacs Band of Ojibwe out in Minnesota. Oh, Red Coast, thanks for joining us. That's awesome. Tlingit Haida out in Alaska. Black Hills Community Loan Fund. We're seeing people from all over the U.S. here. And throughout the webinar, if you have any questions that you'd like answered, please feel free to type them into the question and answer feature, and we'll be happy to address them at the appropriate time or type them in and reply all. So please just feel free to utilize that feature, and I'll turn it back over to Heather.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, and like Stephanie said, yeah, feel free to kind of put those questions as they come up. We'll make sure to interrupt our awesome presenters and say, oh, you know, so-and-so has a question about this or that, so just feel free to send those in as they come up. Finally, the last piece I'm going to do is turn the webinar over to Debbie Goensmith with Groundswell Services and let you all know that we're recording this webinar like we always do, so you can always revisit this. Debbie has a master's degree in economic development and 15 years of direct experience working with multicultural community groups on 3 continents to pursue environmental, cultural, and economic goals. Her experience also includes 6 years directing a nonprofit organization that empowers Hawaiian communities to reclaim stewardship of the places where they live, work, and play. And today, Debbie specializes in nonprofit capacity building, especially in the areas of participatory assessment processes, strategic planning, community organizing, network development and coordination, and program evaluation. And she will be joined by one of our fearless leaders and COO, Crystal Langholz, with many of you know and lots of experience in the field and running a Native CDFI, so I think we're in really good hands. And so all that being said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Debbie.
Thanks, Heather. And Heather, do I have control also of the slides at this point?
Yes. Yep, you're all good to go.
Okay. I'm forwarding and it's not forwarding, so that's why. Maybe there's just a little bit of a lag. Oh, there we go. So looks like there's just a little bit of lag time. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'll get adjusted to the lag time on the slides. But just to start, it's really wonderful to have you all with us today. I'm excited to cover this information with Crystal. We're going to cover a bunch of stuff. We just have a little bit of time to do it. This is our roadmap. We're going to start by looking at the preparation that is best to take care of before you even start thinking about writing a proposal. Good preparation is really going to shine through when it's time to write your proposal because you'll have very satisfying answers to the questions that funders will ask in their request for proposals. So just want to hammer home that winning grant proposals are really about 80 to 90% preparation, and it's only 10 to 20% actual writing. So that's why we're going to spend a chunk of time there. And after we discuss preparation, we'll go through the steps from planning the proposal, writing it, and reviewing it prior to submission. So like I said, it's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so we're going to jump right in. So the first step is preparation. It's key. And I'm not going to ask you guys to divulge your own habits, but I will admit that I have sat down to write a grant proposal on the day it was due. Not a good experience, not a good plan. So we're going to talk about what to do instead. The overall thing to keep in mind for this stage is that before you can write a winning proposal, you have to really know the project that you're writing about. So the first stage is a needs assessment. Every project or program that you do, and I'm going to use project and program interchangeably here, every project or program that you do should be based on your organization's target audience that you and the need that your project is going to address. So every funder is going to want to know in a proposal or in the request for proposal who your target audience is, what their need is, how that need impacts your audience, what are you going to do about it, and how that will make a difference. And that's really what your needs assessment covers. You should include data like facts and statistics to back up the statements you're making in your needs assessment. This might include secondary information like census data. For a CDFI, this could include information about the economic status of your target audience, like employment, income, poverty, small business needs, and so on. This is a really great time to survey your target market to get information that helps you to better understand their needs. And that kind of original research will really help you stand out with funders.
So this is Crystal Langholz, and I just wanted to add that the needs assessment piece is really critical. It's critical in a couple ways. First of all, the best proposals really flow from the larger sense of how the project or the grant fits into your overall mission, and that really comes from the larger organizational needs assessment that you might do, the market study. And so having a really good market analysis or market study that really determines your strategic plan and all the things that you're prioritizing really positions you well to take advantage of individual grant opportunities as they come up. There also is like surveying that specifically you might need to do for specific grant applications. So for example, if we're working with a client, one of the things that's really important for an A&A proposal, for example, is to show like the community buy-in and engagement and the and excitement about the process. And so this idea of even just doing a small 10-question survey that really shows specifically that the community is specifically excited about that very specific project that you're going to be doing. And having some facts and figures that you can pull around that specific proposal, it can really help. So there's kind of this broader needs assessment that determines the whole mission and part of your organization, which all of your funding and strategy should sit under. And then there's also, little supplementary pieces that you can do, such as that, quick surveying, et cetera, for kind of a specific proposal based on the specific funding needs and that specific project.
Thanks, Crystal. If you need some assistance with putting together a needs assessment or even doing surveys, there's a good resource that I've shown here called the Community Toolbox to University of Kansas, and there's a web address on the right-hand side, but you can also just do a web search for Community Toolbox, and it goes through the steps of how to conduct a needs assessment and how to do a survey and quite a few other tools as well. So just a tool to point you to. So before writing, you're going to want to make sure that your organizational house is in order, so to speak. Funders are going to ask you in the proposal to basically prove that they can trust you to do the work you say you can do in a certain amount of time and for a certain amount of money. So they're looking for things like whether you have adequate staffing to execute the program or project and whether your staff has the competencies needed to do that work. They're going to be looking for proof that your organization has strong leadership They want to know whether you already have or whether you have a plan to acquire the physical resources and infrastructure that you need to do the work. They want to see that you can demonstrate a history of sound financial management, and that includes experience managing similar grants. And so often if you're a young organization starting out, you might find that you're more likely to get smaller amounts of funding until you can prove that you can handle larger amounts. And what goes along with that is basically your track record. Have you faithfully executed this or similar projects or programs successfully in the past? And you're going to need to be able to demonstrate that. Part of it is, has your organization been able to keep up with the various requirements that are necessary to operate legally as a nonprofit entity or CDFI? So many of these questions can be answered if you've already been engaged in some sort of monitoring and evaluation. If you haven't, before you ever start writing a proposal, that's the time to start pulling together evaluation information prior to even seeking funding. Crystal, do you have anything else about the monitoring and evaluation aspects that can be so important?
Yes, I would just say that the easiest way to get funded for something is to be able to prove that you have the capacity to do something, and that the resources that they're providing allows you to scale it up. And I think one of the things we struggle with as Native CDFIs and Native organizations is being really good at doing our work and not always great at doing the impact and evaluation that shows how good we are at doing our work. We're just oftentimes in smaller organizations and smaller shops, and so it's really hard to make that time for it. So if you end up if you end up prioritizing that, thinking about that as part of the overall capitalization work that you are doing, it can really be helpful for making time to prioritize that work. And we will have some separate webinars coming out soon. We are doing some specific work on helping develop an impact and evaluation system called Otis that should help with all that grant and research related, all the data that you're going to need for your proposals moving forward. So we'll make sure you guys get information about that when we do our follow-up.
Thanks, Crystal. So the next piece that you need to look at is your collaboration. Funders are going to want to see that you're not doing this by yourself. So your project is going to be more attractive if they can see that you're involving your target audience in shaping the project, that you're consulting with other experts in the subject area. So what sectors will your work intersect with, and are representatives from those sectors involved with your project? What resources are they bringing to the project? Because oftentimes funders don't want to be the sole funder. So if you can show either cash match or non-cash match through volunteer time or other resources, it's going to strengthen your proposal. They also want to see that you're taking the proper steps to ensure that you're avoiding redundancy. So for example, a Native CDFI might want to collaborate with tribal development or economic development, banking, workforce development, small business development, organizations and associations, so that you're complementing the work that's being done by others instead of repeating it. If your program or project already exists, then as we mentioned before, you want to be collecting the data and doing the monitoring and evaluation so you have some results to show. Funders really like to see hard facts and figures and statistics. But also your proposal is going to be much stronger if you include the soft data, like a couple of stories that help your reader connect with your audience and better understand how your program makes a difference. So for a CDFI, this could mean information such as how many small businesses have been created with your organization's loan assistance, how many people have been employed, how many clients have improved their credit scores, and so on, just depending on what types of work you're engaged in. A really compelling story might follow a client from the time she first came in to talk to your CDFI about a loan, to the sense of pride she feels in running a small business and providing for her family. So if you can be collecting that kind of information before you ever even sit down to write a proposal, then the proposal writing process is going to not only be easier, but the product that you create is going to be much more compelling. In the same vein, sorry, Crystal, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Debbie's going to talk a little bit later about knowing your audience, and I just wanted to say that around this this hard facts and figures versus the stories piece, knowing your funder and which is going to resonate more with them. So, there are certain organizations and certain funders, like for example, the financial data really is going to speak a lot to, for example, the CDFI fund, and a lot of private foundations, it's really going to be the stories that are going to be compelling, right? So you want to weave the story together, how much you rely on each, the data versus those stories really relies a little bit on the funder, but Debbie's absolutely right that you want to have both and find ways of integrating both no matter who the audience is. It just depends, where you put your focus and your time really just depends on the individual funder and what they're looking for.
Absolutely. Thanks, Crystal. This is also the time to be sure your organization is compliant with general nonprofit and other regulatory concerns. So there's a list of things here, but for your particular organization, there might be others. You want to make sure your 990s, if 990s are required, that you have those in. Any required reporting that you have for current grants or other funding, reports like if you're a certified CDFI, you have an annual certification report that needs to be timely. NACA grants are going to want to see your loan policies and your financial policies and procedures. They want to see the appropriate checks and balances there. So once you determine what the funders are, you'll have a better idea of specific compliance things that you need to take care of. But there are these general overall compliance issues that need to be taken care of pretty far in advance. So registration on grants.gov, AMIS, the SAM system, which is the System for Award Management, getting your DUNS number, your federal employment number, those kinds of things can take a little bit of time. So you just want to make sure that your nonprofit or your organization is compliant. So next, there's some politicking that needs to happen with funding, with receiving funding. And basically the advice that you'll hear is do it now and do it later. So if you know that different federal agencies, for example, fund work that intersects with the work that you do, you can call them now, even if you don't have a specific proposal in mind at this point, just to talk about this is the kind of work we do. This is what we're thinking about. Does this sound like something that your organization or your funding agency is interested in partnering with us on? There are some folks who will even say that when you are working on a specific proposal, you can let your representatives in government know, because they can advocate for you if it's your government agency. So, about politicking, there's never a time when politicking shouldn't be happening. It's something that's an ongoing process. So if your organization has done all of this important preparation work, then you or your team should be able to put it all together and clearly define what is going to be different because of your program. And that's really what the funder is going to want to see in your proposal, this future desired state that becomes your project or your program goals, and then the specific measurable changes you think you will see in a program period become your objectives, and then the activities you need to do to reach those objectives within that time period, and from that, what is the cost to accomplish those activities. So if you have this general scope of your whole program or project ahead of time, then when it comes time to write a specific proposal, you take that general information and you tailor it, as Crystal was saying earlier, you tailor it to that particular funder. And it's much less frustrating because you're not scrambling around facing a looming deadline with a grant proposal and trying to figure out what your whole program goals and objectives are. Once I have all of this information together, that's when I start my funder search. I look for funders who want to accomplish goals that are very similar to the ones I have defined in my program or project, that they fund the activities that I need to get funding for. So for example, if there's a funder that doesn't fund planning, but planning is what I need to do, then I might set aside that funder's name for another project. If I need staff funding, but they don't fund salaries, again, I'll set that aside. So you want to match your program's goals, objectives, activities, and budgets with prospective funders as you're doing your funder search. You scrutinize the eligibility requirements and the financial match requirements so you can assess quickly whether pursuing funding from a particular source is worth your time and effort.
Hey, Debbie, we had a clarifying question here. We were just curious, what do you perceive as the difference between goals and objectives? Like, do we need to have both?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and we get into it a little bit later, but I'll just say it's so interesting because different funders will even call these things different things. So there's goals and objectives and activities, and then there's outcomes and outputs, and so everybody has their lingo, and part of the work is reading through their materials really carefully so you know what they mean by these different terminologies. But the way I think about it is your overarching goal is the desired future state of whatever it is. So if you want to see, economic resiliency in your community, that might be your overarching goal. Whereas an objective is you take that goal and you look at the next 12 months, for example, and you think, okay, what am I going to accomplish in the next 12 months in order to get toward economic resiliency? So maybe in 12 months, my objective is to support the creation of, 15 new micro-enterprises in my community. That would be more of an objectives level, or to put a certain dollar amount of capital in business development within my community. Crystal, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, that's great. That was really helpful. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, sure. Goals and objectives can they can be really tricky because objectives, you don't want to get down to the activity level. You want to keep it at that, what some people call SMART goals, which means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So you're looking at a particular time frame during which you're going to accomplish particular things that are going to move you toward that overarching, larger, longer-term goal. And there are quite a few resources online, too, about writing goals and objectives. And if you just do an internet search for that, there are tools out there that can help. And there are also good books in libraries, especially if you look up grant writing books that can help you differentiate between goals and objectives. It's really one of the most tricky things about grant writing, I find, actually. Okay, so we talked about the preparation component, and now we're sitting down to, we've identified prospective funders, and now we're going to plan how I'm going to approach this particular funder and write a grant for that funder. So you've done the groundwork, you're in a good position, and you're ready to go. So this is what Crystal alluded to previously. I really start by doing a pretty good dig on the funder that I'm looking at. Winning proposals are really going to make a clear connection between their mission and the work that you want to do. That's really one of the key components that I think people miss sometimes, because you're so focused on what your mission and your goals are, but what the funder wants to see is that you're going to help them accomplish their mission and their goals more than, they care about their mission and their goals, frankly, more than they care about your mission and your goals. So it's kind of playing a matchmaker role. I also look at what they have given, what that particular funder has given to other organizations and for what projects. So you can find that often online in sources like annual reports, or they'll have strategic plans or marketing materials. I just scrutinize and I go through a dig through their website and I look at all the information I can find about what they have funded. I jot down notes as I go along about what parts of my program are really going to connect best with what they do. I'm thinking about the activities that I think this funder will appreciate the most. What portion of my program budget seems to resonate best with that particular funder. And I'm even jotting down key phrases and words or terminology that they use so that I repeat them in the proposal. So if I'm looking at economic resiliency, for example, if that's a phrase that they use quite a bit and they're describing the work that they do, then you better believe I'm going to use economic resiliency as terminology in my proposal as well. By the end of this research, I know how much I'm going to ask for, the budget categories I'm going to ask this funder to help us with, what parts of my program I want to emphasize in the proposal, how I can frame my program as a way to help this funder reach their mission and their goals, and I've got language I can use that's going to resonate with the funder. Then I do a little bit more of a nitpicky read through the proposal requirements. And really the importance of this step cannot be overstated, because one of the top reasons proposals are rejected is just simply that the requirements aren't met. You've got to follow their directions perfectly if you want to be considered for funding. And this seems like so basic, but you wouldn't believe how many times, if you've ever been a reviewer, how many times people miss little things and miss points because I've even had requests for proposals that say that you can't have paragraphs that are more than 1 inch long, for example, and they tell you what font size you're supposed to use and what your margins are supposed to be. And they give you those rules, honestly, because when they get a whole stack of proposals in and they've got a little bit of time to review them, the first person who gets them is just looking for compliance with those requirements, and they're just culling half of the proposals and putting them straight into the trash can because they didn't meet those basic requirements. So these are nitpicky and they seem unimportant, but in terms of winning grant proposals and making sure that you get to the next step where they actually read the content of your proposal, it's super important. Often there will be assistance available to you, especially if you're dealing with federal proposals, and sometimes state or even private foundations will have webinars, materials online that you can download and read through that will help you answer the questions in their request for proposals in a better way. And so you should absolutely take advantage, no matter how experienced of a writer you are, you should take advantage of those resources.
Oh,
and then,
hi, Debbie.
Hi.
Yeah, this is Heather. I was also going to add, too, that this might also serve as a point of like another way you can screen which proposals you go for, because I know some where I've looked at the website, I've read the materials they put out about it, and I think, oh, this could be a good fit for us, but then I'll actually go to one of these webinars or sessions and I, listen to what they tell you and hear the questions people ask, and I'm like, oh, you know what, this isn't a good fit. I need to spend my, my time better elsewhere. So you can also use it as a screening process too. That's just what I do.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. That's an excellent point. Very good idea. Often, and this goes with what Heather was saying too, often the funder will have a scoring rubric or a scoring matrix of some sort, or at least define in their request for proposals how they're going to score your answers. And that's a really good place to start and study. So you study each section. So usually you'll see something where it'll say, like under the NACA TA grant, it'll say, defining your purpose is worth 15 points. And then they'll have a little paragraph there about what it means to define your purpose. And so they're really giving you what you need to know to respond appropriately to their questions. And if you don't answer the questions they have about your purpose in that section, they're going to mark you down on points. So using the scoring rubric or matrix as you go through is really going to be an important step to keep you on track. And I know Crystal actually has a bit of a case study next talking about how important these rubrics are. So Crystal, do you want to go through this, and you can just let me know when to forward slide.
Great. Yeah, so I just wanted to, Debbie, and we tried to really kind of give you here some really big picture things, but we also wanted to give you like some really nitty gritty kind of look at things. And so that's what this is. I just wanted to give you a little case study here. This is a specific situation that happened. We had a client that reached out to us a couple years ago, and they had written a USDA RBOG, which is the Business Opportunities Grant that they have, and which has now been rolled into. They combined two sources of funding, and but this is the predecessor to the existing USDA Rural Development Grant to support small business. And so they had not gotten funded, and they had worked on the proposal, and they were asking us to do a review, like what could we do, how do we rewrite this so that we would potentially be funded next year. So I just wanted to show you some very specific things and how we use the rubric to do that. So here's just the overall rubric, and I know that you actually aren't going to be able to read this all, but I just wanted to give you the kinds of things, a sense of the kinds of things that are on here. And you see the different scores based on the different kinds of areas, the questions that they're going to be asking here. The USDA is really good at sharing their rubrics, so we appreciate that. Some other groups, they're not quite as willing and transparent, but USDA always does a really good job of this specific thing, saying exactly how many points you're going to get in very specific areas. They really try to standardize that. So this is what the overall rubric is, and if you go to the next slide. So the first thing that we did looking through this is we say, was there any place that we're missing points that we could have gotten the points? Like anything we just didn't see that would have brought up the overall score. So what I have highlighted here, you can see that there's 15 points available for experiencing trauma due to major natural disaster that occurred not more than 3 years prior to filing the application for RBOG assistance. So we went back and we actually pulled the research, right, and found out that actually, in fact, that they had, this area had a flood, and it was related in no way to the overall proposal. But we were able to have a little section that said, we labeled it, when we do our grant proposals, we try to make it as insanely easy for the reviewer as possible. So, we literally just had a section of it that was labeled like experienced trauma in the local community was the header, and then underneath it, it says there was flooding in 2010, and we're on the official blah, blah, blah list. And that was enough to get them the extra 15 points in that category. So the first thing you always do with the rubrics is you look for making sure that you can maximize all of those points. If there's any sort of weird prioritization points that you can find them and make sure that those are integrated into the proposal. So next slide. So the other thing that we did is we looked at their proposal, and what they had done is they had literally cut and pasted their normal needs assessment language, right? They had cut and pasted the, they had these really great, and they were well-written paragraphs, right? But they were about the unemployment in the community and just the normal census kind of data thing that you would normally pull, right? But this was very clear. Need was very clearly important in this proposal, and they had some of the data that they were looking for, and they thought that they had answered the question. But what we went through and we did is we actually looked at, okay, so here are the way that they're awarding their points. Has it experienced long-term poverty? Has experienced long-term population decline? Has experienced long-term job deterioration? So same thing, make it as easy as possible. We literally had a section that we labeled long-term poverty, and a section we labeled long-term population decline and long-term job deterioration. And then we went in and we broke apart all of those data about needs, and we put them into the existing rubric, right? We broke it in, we put it underneath those headers, and then we pulled a couple extra things, right? We told a little story about the population decline, and we told a little story about how the lumber mills had been closing, and here's an example of that. And tried to, the community didn't change at all, right? But we were really trying to make sure that we maximize getting all the points in those specific areas by really, really well using that rubric. So next slide. And this goes back to the politicking part of award-winning proposals. The USDA also, in many of their sections, has a little thing where they say the state director can assign 15 discretionary points of their choice, right? So our first question to this group is, well, have you met the state director? If you haven't met the state director, I think you should, as a way of trying to make sure that this proposal was on the radar screen of the state director so that they could assign their discretionary points. So long story short, those were just very couple small tangible things. I mean, this took less than 5 hours, and the proposal was funded the next time around. So that's how you maximize using the rubric to your full advantage. Same project, same community, same everything. It was just about maximizing the rubric and telling the story exactly the way the funder wanted to hear it.
Thanks, Crystal. And I just want to emphasize what you were talking about in terms of the way you laid out your proposal too, because that's so true. You got to put it in a format that looks really like a no-brainer to whoever the reviewer is. And so if you use the same language they use and you just use that as your headers, they don't have to think about it. And if you're reviewing 50 proposals, not having to think about that one little extra thing and digging for information that they're asking for is so helpful. So, planning your story now. A winning proposal tells a good story. So you use everything you know about the funder and what they're looking for, especially all that stuff you learned from the rubric and how you're going to lay out your document, to plan the arc of the story that you want to tell, to demonstrate, again, the fit between your program and their goals. And you want to also develop this kind of sense of urgency. Why this program? Why now, and why your organization? So again, you're becoming this matchmaker connecting your project with the funder's goals in the overarching story. So now it's time to sit down and write. You've done all this background work. It's so much easier now to craft a winning proposal. So the one thing I want you to really remember as you sit down to write is to keep it simple, keep it honest, keep it relevant. That simplicity goes back to what Crystal was saying, using their language in headers that make sense to them, because you want it to be as simple as possible. So what I mean by follow your bliss here is that when I'm sitting down to write a proposal, I don't necessarily write the proposal in the order that the funder has given me, in terms of like do question number 1 first, do question number 2 second. I start with the sections that are easiest for me, that make the most sense to me, that are most intuitive. So the way I typically do it, because I've done all the preparation work, I start with the goals and objectives. And I tweak those overall goals and objectives that I've developed during the preparation phase, and I tweak them for this particular proposal to connect the program with the funder as we keep discussing. I developed a work plan, which is almost always required in just about any proposal that you submit. It really can be very simple to state what different activities are going to take place, when they will happen, and who will be responsible for them. And I often, unless it's an online format that I'm having to fill out, I often just put that in a table format. That's the easiest thing for the reviewer to look at and understand. So the reason I do those pieces first, the goals, objectives, activities, and work plan, and even the budget, I do those pieces first because you're going to bring those things up again and again as you go through the proposal, and I want to be very consistent, because one of the things that will knock points off of your proposal is if you say, for example, you're going to do an activity in June in one part of your proposal, but then in another part of your proposal you're talking about the same activity, and now you say it's going to be in April. And even something that small is going to cause confusion in the reviewer, and they're going to say, oh, this organization isn't quite as planned. They don't really know what they're doing as much as I thought they did, and you'll end up getting points taken off just because of simple things like that. So if you've got the work plan and the budget and all those things done, then you can be consistent throughout. Make sure that when you're creating your grant budget, you pay really close attention to the instructions on what budget items are allowed and not allowed, and what match requirements are. So that's just another little tip, because they really do scrutinize the budget quite closely. Usually in an RFP, they'll want you to include an executive summary, which will be like the first thing on their list, but it's usually the last thing that I write. It's the section that summarizes the rest of the proposal. And I usually, as I'm writing the executive summary, I'm just going through and I'm actually lifting sentences from the rest of my proposal and tightening them up for the executive summary. So I really do recommend that you end with this, even though it's the first section that probably shows up on the RFP. Also, some people, as they're discussing your proposal, if they have committee meetings around what's going to get funded, they'll just refer back to your executive summary over and over again. So I choose the most potent data, the most compelling stories for that particular section, but I also try to make it the simplest and the tightest section in terms of how tightly edited it is. No fluff, no extra information, just make it really clear and compelling, because that's what they're going to refer to again and again.
That's so funny, Debbie. You know, I actually usually write my executive summary last too. I wonder how many other people do that. But I actually write first. I always do the budget first, which for me, because the budget, I can't tell you how many times I say, I promise I start writing this really great proposal about how I'm going to like do 65 trainings and we're going to help 3 million people, and I just like have all these big visions for what my goals and objectives are going to be, and then I sit down and I'm like, oh, and I have $25,000, bummer. Usually start money question and then try to scale down the project, but I think you're totally right that it's about the integration of the two and how thoughtfully prepared they are and how cohesive they are, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen and flagged things where it was clear that they hadn't been either prepared by the same person, like the finance person had prepared the budget, but and it had no relevance to what the person who wrote the program person who wrote it was trying to get at. So that's great advice there. And we have a question. Cindy, we're going to unmute you here. Cindy, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Cindy, you're unmuted if you'd like to ask. Okay, you might have to unmute your phone. Okay. No worries. We'll, it looks like that came up a while ago, so we're sorry we didn't catch that sooner. We will take time for questions at the end, too. So, Debbie, continue on.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that cohesion piece between your goals, objectives, activities, and the budget really is extremely important, because they really will look at that and say, wait, you're not doing very much and you're asking for a lot of money, or you're asking for not very much money and you're saying you're going to do a lot. So either way. Sorry, I'm trying to, oh, here we go. Just a little delay. Okay, so here we come back to that goals and objectives question again. Really spend some time with your goals and objectives. Winning proposals, they have ambitious but realistic goals, because funders can kind of smell, you know, they can tell if you're really trying to oversell what you're going to do. So goals and objectives are kind of like an architectural plan. You can see the desired future, and you have a plan for getting there. So again, as I mentioned before, goals broadly describe the future condition that you hope to achieve by the end of the project period. So for example, if you're writing a proposal for 2 years of funding, then your goals might be a little bit broader than if you're writing goals for just a 1-year period. And then the objectives, again, should be very specific and measurable. They should be what's achievable within the grant award period. And then you just want to make sure that those goals and objectives do connect directly to your work plan. Again, ambitious but realistic, because you don't want it to require, you know, like a leap of faith for the reviewer to believe the activities will actually get you to the goals that you state. And keep in mind that once you have your goals and objectives, the evaluation questions that the funder is going to ask can be answered using your objectives. So for example, if your objective was something like, I think I mentioned an example earlier where you were going to put so many resources into the development of microenterprises in your community. Well, so your evaluation measure is going to be that amount of resources or the development of a certain number of small businesses. So if you, as you evaluate your project, did you put those many resources into microenterprise development? Did you put, did you support the creation of a certain number of microenterprises or small businesses? So your objectives should tie directly into those evaluation components. They're really going to define what's going to be different at the end of the grant period.
Yeah, Debbie, that's great. And I just wanted to say, for example, with NACA or something like that, where you get to kind of pick the goals that you're resonating with. So, for example, that NACA, they always ask your strategic goals. You're usually going to be picking several of those. That you're trying to focus on. Whenever I pick the strategic goals that I'm talking about in NACA, I always pick the things that I know are going to resonate with them, right? So they're going to be things that would directly tie into my lending portfolio, and I'm usually going to have some sort of lending goal that I'm tying onto, maybe I'd have an earned revenue goal that would tie into self-sufficiency or something like that. Those are all part of our overall strategic goals for the organization. And we have tons of other ones too, right? But I specifically picked the ones that I thought were going to resonate with the funder. So I think what you're talking about here, directly tying it into the goals and objectives that they're looking at and are part of the ways that they're evaluating the proposal, is really the crucial piece here.
Yeah, excellent point. And you do the same thing actually with the weaving in data and stories. We talked about that before. People remember some of what you tell them with statistics, but they remember a whole heck of a lot more of it when you tell it with stories. Again, depending on the funder, because I know for NACA proposals, they really are interested in your financial information and the financial metrics that they have. So again, everything goes back to matching whatever you're doing, whatever you're writing, to what that particular funder is interested in. But definitely use data and stories. When you tell stories, it's the story that you're telling through your proposal. You want to keep it pretty simple. When you think back to the best stories that you've heard many times, most times they're pretty simple. It's about, where you were and what happened, and then, why you're telling the story. You can use stories about your target audience or what your program has accomplished. Most proposals will have limited word counts or character counts, so you're going to want to prune your story, edit it, and keep only the most essential details to make your point. Also, another little trick is to save your most potent stories, most compelling stories for the beginning and the end of your narrative if you're able to, because that's where the stories are going to stick with your reader the most. If it's kind of buried in the middle, they might forget it, but if you start out with it, that starts out with a bang. If you finish with it, it leaves a lasting impression. So if you're able to, and if you have to pick and choose where you're going to tell a nice story, the beginning and the end can be a helpful place. But on the other hand, tell the truth. I mean, this should go without saying, right, but they really can tell. Exaggeration and hyperbole really have no place, and research has actually shown that exaggeration and hyperbole in stories for this purpose don't create a compelling narrative that connects with people. Also, another little tip I would say about telling stories is that you don't want to cast your target audience as negative or pathetic. You know what I mean? You want your audience to understand conflict and challenge, but to see the people that you're working with in your target audience as capable and determined and hopeful. So you want to be able to tell a pretty hopeful story through all of this. That will resonate better. There's been all kinds of research done on storytelling, and that is one of the pieces of research that has been shown. Last, you want to leave ample time for review, and that goes back to this whole thing with, writing it the day that it's due. You really miss out on the review part. You miss out on a lot, but you definitely miss out on the review piece. My best proposals are ones for which I gave myself at least a day between drafting the last section I was drafting, and then gave myself a day, and then went back and edited the proposal. And winning proposals are edited. It's really one of those steps that we often take very lightly. What you're looking for is if your story is clear and compelling. So you go back through, you think about the connection you were trying to make between the mission and the goals of the funder. You think about the story arc you were trying to achieve. I usually do one read through first, just looking for those kind of big picture elements, like how well am I making this connection to my funder here? And I'm asking myself, am I communicating urgency? Is my story a positive one? Am I conveying passion and showing a clear path from the need of my target audience to the solution that my organization is providing? And then I look, is my plan realistic? Does my story come across as honest? Am I achieving all of this while demonstrating how my organization can make a difference? And am I doing all of this clearly and simply? And then you want to use that rubric again. Act as a reviewer. So, I do that one big, overall big picture read, and then I go back through, and I have the matrix, the scoring matrix in hand, and it's a more technical review. And I'm saying, okay, well, they wanted to know this out of the purpose section. Have I answered those questions? Would I give myself 15 points for that section? And it gives you another opportunity. Is there anything I missed here, like a natural resource disaster that happened in the past 3 years, that I can make sure that I bring forward again? And then winning proposals have suffered through the most detailed level of a review, which means just your editing for spelling, grammar, punctuation. Please at least double check, if not triple check, your math and your budget, because that will that's easy points, and you don't want to lose those points just from making a math error. You want to take out jargon and acronyms most of the time, because often the reviewers don't know your world, and so you want to make sure that you don't assume that they know acronyms. Short sentences, uncomplicated language, nothing too flowery, because the reviewer is going to speed through. Think about all the proposals they have sitting on their desk. They're going to speed through, and they're going to get frustrated if they don't understand your content, or if they have to reread your sentences because they're so lengthy, or because they have to wade through some acronyms. Like, really, clarity is king here.
Yeah, Debbie, I just would reiterate. I would just reiterate what you're saying, Debbie, around the editing process. For example, we see when we do our NACA reviews, we oftentimes will see like acronyms for partners, right, is a big problem. You have a big community action group that you work with all the time, and you call them WSCKU Quasity, and like they're like, we have no idea who this is, right? So that's a really great way to keep people from really getting into your world is assuming that they know it already. And then the other thing I would just really say around this is just assume that your reviewers are really tired and they're like reviewing it and they're just normal people, and you want to make everything basically as easy as possible for them the entire time. And so, making all the information really easy to find through using headers, that idea of the small sentences, the not adding extra things. Assume that they are very busy people and they have a big stack of things to get through. And the more that they like you at the end of the proposal, the better chance you have of getting funded. So just make their life easy. Bold things that have, that are specific, and you're trying to reiterate, because you want to assume that they're not particularly like giving your proposal all the time and attention that maybe you would want them to, right? Because they're just people and maybe poor overworked government employees or something like that.
That's such a good point. And sometimes I've seen people, when they're trying to keep within those specified character counts, the way they'll do it is to use acronyms and stuff. But really, it's better to find different ways to tighten up your wording. Don't fall back on acronyms, because it makes the reviewer stop, and then they get irritated with you. You don't want to make them irritated with you. So there are some things that we've gone over that really help you stand out. If you've done all of this work, the preparation, the planning, the writing, the reviewing, your proposal will stand out. And so when faced with this mountain of proposals to read, reviewers really give high praise for proposals that do the things that are listed here. Follow the guidelines. Demonstrate the fit. Tell your story succinctly. Demonstrate accountability. Prove your point with facts and stories. Include a realistic work plan and budget. And if you do these things, the reviewer is going to be left with the sense that the project is important to do now, and that your organization is the one to do it. That is success. However, if you get a no answer back, you know, a lot of times they are open to your questions. Ask them why. Ask for the review. Some funders will even give you the review sheet back, just like Crystal was talking about with the USDA grant. You know, have somebody else review it if the funder isn't willing to or is not able to review it. You know, get a second pair of eyes on it and see what you can find out. And just like with that USDA grant, it might work out better the next time. We have just a couple of minutes here for Q&A, but we can take questions.
All right, so we'll give you all a couple of seconds to see if any questions pop in. If not, no worries. Always feel free to email us with any follow-up questions. And like we said, we'll send this information to everybody too, so you'll have this to refer back to as well. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions pop in. And so just in the interest of respecting everybody's time, I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank you so much, Debbie, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you, Crystal, for adding in such helpful information that really kind of brought like additional experience and expertise to the discussion. And so that being said, I hope we provided information that's going to be useful to you to access more funding opportunities for your organizations. And as always, I always make sure to point out that a very brief survey should pop up when you close the webinar. Please fill it out. It helps us track the series and make sure we always continue to improve. That being said, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Happy holidays.